Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Morgan Scalley being named the head coach in waiting over at Utah. Obviously a very interesting thing, not only for the next couple of years for Utah, but how soon is Kyle Whittingham going to hang him up? And when he does, it's going to be a sad day, that's for sure, for college football. But let's get into week three, or segment three here, excuse me, and let's talk about the Big 12 preseason media poll that came out. This is obviously something that will come out for every single conference, and we'll likely break them down in some form or another. Obviously, I will give my picks towards I think the end of this month, maybe early August. We'll decide on that here in the next little bit. But at the end of the day, it's always really interesting to see what the people that are right around that conference think. The people that live and breathe that conference, how do they see this kind of playing out this upcoming year? And for the most part, it's what you would expect. Utah and Kansas State are setting the pace in this conference. That is no surprise to really anyone. They are definitely the two teams that everyone's coming in trying to chase. And it'll be fascinating to watch if anyone can kind of throw a wrench into that, because the three teams right after them have every ability to compete with those two teams up top on any given weekend, where Oklahoma State has every bit of experience you could possibly need. They have every bit of talent you can need, but the offensive and defensive lines are super experienced. Obviously, Ollie Gordon coming back is huge, although he ran into a little bit of trouble off the field, which we can break down possibly next week. But obviously, this is going to be a really good team. Kansas, the exact same, a ton of experience on that roster. Jalen Daniels, if he's healthy, this is a team that can absolutely win this conference. And then kind of the same deal with Arizona. If Noah Fafita is healthy and special, they're going to be more than fine and absolutely have a chance to make that way into Arlington. And then all bets are off, really. If you play a singular game against one opponent in this country that can beat pretty much anyone, Arizona is definitely one of them. They are scary on the offensive side of the ball, so those are the teams that got those first place votes. As you can see, Utah leading the way, Kansas, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Arizona leading the way with all of the first round votes. But then you get into what I'd like to call kind of the mess in this conference, which is Iowa State through Colorado. I think Iowa State and West Virginia and UCF to a certain degree are a little bit more stable than the other ones around them. I think they have a little bit more of ability to make some of the mistakes and, recover for them because of the experience on those teams, because of the coaches on those two teams, I think are hugely important. The rest of them, it feels like coin toss. Any given week, they can beat anyone on the schedule, and I think all of these teams have the ability to do that. Obviously, Colorado is the team that everyone's going to point to as someone that can explode this entire thing, and absolutely they can. If things come together for them, especially on that offensive line, things get really interesting really fast, because Shadur Sanders with time is something we haven't necessarily seen at Colorado yet, but if it were to happen, I think it would be a scary sight for pretty much any defense that he would be going against. So that obviously is a team that could totally change this entire thing up. I think, frankly, I'd probably have them over TCU in this, but it's splitting hairs for the most part there. I think then you have kind of the rest. You have Baylor through Arizona State. This is a group of teams that I frankly think have an ability to screw up some people's seasons, to be totally honest with you. That might be kind of the peak for them this upcoming year. I think Baylor and Houston are the two that really stand out to me because of who they have at quarterback. You have Daquan Finn over at Baylor coming in from Toledo, excuse me. And then you have Donovan Smith over at Houston, who's been getting some NFL draft love, which is very interesting. But both those guys are absolutely elite athletes. They can do really, really incredible things on the ground and through the air. And I think they're one of those quarterbacks that you could look up on a random weekend in the middle of October and figure out that Baylor, or you figure out that Houston is beating Kansas or beating Oklahoma State by 7 or 10 points. And then you got to tune into that game, because these are two teams that are just a little bit dangerous because of who's under center. Cincinnati obviously hit a huge roadblock in their success for the season when Dante Corleone has been out, or ruled out indefinitely with blood clots. Obviously want a very quick recovery from him. Very much hoping that he gets back on the field as quickly as possible and gets healthy as quickly as possible, most importantly. So obviously a very, very special player for them, a huge loss for this team. And just hopefully he gets healthy, gets back on the field, and Cincinnati can have his services in some way or another this upcoming season. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a crazy conference. There's no two ways about that. It is going to be all over the place. I think there's no one that really separates themselves too much from the team right in front of them. In fact, I think the biggest gap here, I could be wrong, the biggest gap is between Colorado and Baylor, which is just over 100 points, and that's not a huge gap by any means. And obviously, it segments it just a little bit, but all of these teams can compete with each other. Colorado, in my opinion, if you had them on the right day and a lot of things were going right for them, they could walk into Kansas State and win a game. They could walk into Oklahoma State and win a game. They could go to Utah and win a game. So there are teams, lower on this list that are dangerous, and it's the reason that everyone's looking at the Big 12 as, in my opinion, the best conference in the country because of how crazy it is, because of how ridiculous it is. Not the best from a team perspective, because the SEC and the Big Ten hold that, but the reality is this is the most fun conference in the country. It's going to be absolutely incredible. Now, there is a path where Utah and Kansas State just kind of roll through everyone and end up in Arlington and face off for that bye in the playoff, but I do think there's enough people to kind of get in their way. I don't think there's anyone that comes out of this undefeated, and frankly, I would not be surprised if we had 10-2 teams facing off in Arlington at the end of the year, because there's going to be some cannibalism here. It's just inevitable. There's too many good teams. There's too many teams with a ton of experience. There's a team like Texas Tech, who we haven't talked about too much on here, but there's tons of talent there, and they are dangerous, especially with that wide receiver group that they have. So they're another team that they sit at 9 right now. They might not just be sitting there at the end of the year. They could find their way to Arlington. So a lot of stuff can happen this upcoming year in this conference. If it were to go entirely chalk, and if it were to go the way that, the odds would say it would go, it's Utah and Kansas State facing off in Arlington for that place in the playoff. If it goes the way that I expect it to go, it's going to be a nightmare. There's going to be tons of 10-2, tons of 9-3 teams. There's going to be tiebreakers that have to be pulled out to get into the championship in Arlington. There's going to be some arguments between these two multiple fan bases in this conference as we get deeper down this season, but it's all about what makes this conference special. This one is different than any other one in the country this year. I think this one, and kind of the ACC to a little bit different of a degree, but particularly this one, there's no one that fully separates themselves from the pack. I could make an argument that Utah is a touch better at most positions than everyone in this group, but it's not to say, that gap is huge between them and Kansas State, or Kansas State to Oklahoma State, or Oklahoma State to Kansas, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be a conference that every single week you're going to have multiple battles. There's not going to be 1 week or really one game. Obviously, if Houston and Arizona State or Houston and Cincinnati are facing off, maybe you don't need to watch that one. No disrespect to those two teams, but maybe you can take that week or that game off. The rest of them you're going to have to watch. You're going to really want to watch, because all of these games are going to be weird. They're going to be different, and it's going to be a lot of weird styles. You're going to have a couple of teams that are going to be really run heavy. You're going to have a couple of teams that are going to throw the ball around the field a little bit more, like Arizona. You're going to have some teams that are entirely veteran laden and have guys that have been in the program for 2-3 years. And then you're going to have the UCFs of the world that are adding tons of new people and essentially rebuilt their entire team this offseason through the portal. So it's just fascinating. It is going to be incredible to watch this upcoming year, because I think the teams that they added fit into this conference almost perfectly. You have Utah, who is immediate contender, absolutely going to be in that conversation for that trip to Arlington. Then you add Arizona, who's right on the outside looking in, definitely a contender in this conference, definitely a team that can make some noise, but is a little bit lower on the totem pole. You also have, Colorado coming in, a very dangerous team that is about as much fun as any team on this list. So they will bring as many eyes as you could possibly want, and they have the chance to do something really, really special this year and make their way up to the top of the Big 12 and do some of the things that I know for a fact Dion really wants to do this upcoming season to prove some of the haters wrong. There's no two ways about that, and if you ask some Colorado fans, I'd be included in that following my video a couple of days ago. But regardless, there are a ton of things that can happen in this conference. I could not tell you how many times I've changed my opinion of who will end up in Arlington in this conference based on little flips in different things around these teams. So I could see Kansas doing it and Jalen Daniels rolling through the schedule and doing something just incredibly special this upcoming year and being the story of the conference. Same thing with Avery Johnson. I could see him totally dominating this conference. I could see Utah just being Utah and absolutely winning over and over and over again and winning their third conference title in 4 years. All of that stuff is on the table and more. So there are a million teams, a million variables that are going to go into this season for the Big 12. And I think when you look at a title prediction that will be coming towards the end of the month or maybe a little bit into August, we'll decide here in the next couple of days, there's going to be a title prediction that I am not fully confident in. I'll be totally honest with you. I've changed my opinion on this probably a dozen times at this point. So when I do make that official statement, I hope that it's a little bit more confident than I feel right now, making any big-time sweeping statements around this conference. But as of right now, I have a feeling I'm going to be saying it kind of out the side of my mouth and be a little bit worried about what the future holds for that prediction. But at the end of the day, it's why I love this conference so much. It's why it's my favorite conference in the country this upcoming year. And it's why I just cannot wait for it to get going, because maybe there isn't that, national title contender. I think Utah could be that if chips fall the right way for them, but maybe there isn't that team that's going to make the semifinals of the playoff and win a national title and be the story of the entire year. But there's about 10 teams that can win that conference realistically. 11, honestly, because I would include Colorado as a team that absolutely could win that conference. Some things do have to break their way, and maybe a little bit more than some of the other teams in the conference, but it's insane that you find a conference with 16 teams and only 5 of them I can actually say have really no shot to win this conference. But it's just going to be absolutely incredible to watch this thing unfold because, as so many people have said, Josh Pate, one of my favorite guys in the college football world, this is America's conference, and it's because of all the nuances. It's because there isn't that team up top. There isn't that national title contender. There's just a hodgepodge of teams that absolutely could beat each other on any given week. So absolutely love the Big 12. It's one of my favorite conferences, probably my favorite conference going into this year, and just cannot wait to see it unfold. But let's get into recruiting. Right after this break, we'll jump into recruiting and talk about a team that in the Big 12 that just got a massive commitment at tight end. So we'll break down that and all of the things happening on the recruiting trail right after this. So stick with us.